The scent of stale coffee and fried potatoes clung to Rose Sterling like a second skin. Each step across the greasy diner floor sent a dull ache through her lower back, a constant reminder of the life growing inside her and the heavy secret she carried. At 23, she felt a lifetime older, her spirit worn thin by endless shifts and the gnawing anxiety of being utterly alone. Her childhood in the foster system had taught her one brutal lesson. No one was coming to save her. Now, with a baby on the way, that lesson felt like a death sentence. She moved with a careful grace, her hands instinctively shielding her barely there belly beneath the loose uniform. A quiet life, she dreamed, somewhere far away by the sea. A place where the air was clean and the only sounds were waves, not the clatter of plates or the low rumble of the subway. Tucked deep in her worn tip jar, beneath a handful of quarters, lay a crumpled bus ticket, a tangible whisper of that impossible dream. Beside it, even more carefully hidden, was a blurry sonogram picture, her baby, a tiny bean of hope in a world of gloom. Her only hope. The diner was mostly empty this late afternoon, a blessing Rose usually cherished. But then he walked in. Liam Moretti didn't just enter a room, he commanded it. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on everyone, especially Rose. He was a force of nature, chillingly composed, his dark eyes sweeping the room with an almost predatory ease before settling on a secluded booth in the back. Rose felt a familiar, uncomfortable tightening in her chest. She knew who he was, or at least she knew his reputation. A man of power, a man of fear, a man she prayed would never truly see her. She hurried to wipe down a nearby counter, trying to melt into the drab wallpaper, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to disappear. His presence alone was enough to make her hands tremble, a primal awareness of sheer, unyielding authority. A low murmur drifted from his booth, punctuated by the clink of ice in a glass. Liam spoke, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. It wasn't loud, but it carried, each word etched with an undeniable weight. Rose froze, a tray forgotten in her hands. "I don't want to hear about it again," he said, his tone flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. He failed. Make an example. No witnesses. Today. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Rose's breath hitched. Execution. The word wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. The implication was clear, unambiguous, and terrifying. Her stomach churned, not just with morning sickness, but with a sudden, overwhelming dread. This was his world, a world of brutal commands and merciless consequences, a world where life was cheap and power absolute. A shiver of pure terror ran down her spine, chilling her to the bone. She thought of the tiny sonogram, the fragile new life within her. How could she possibly bring a child into a world touched by such darkness? How could she protect them from a man like him, from the very air he breathed? Her fingers instinctively went to her tip jar, touching the hidden picture, then scrabbling for the crumpled bus ticket. The quiet dream of a life by the sea felt utterly distant now, swallowed by the echo of his voice and the chilling reality of his power. Her hands shook uncontrollably, the bus ticket a fragile shield against the storm brewing in her heart. The echo of Liam Moretti's voice, cold and final, had chased Rose from the diner and into the frantic night. No witnesses. Today. The words played on a loop in her mind, a terrifying lullaby for the fear-stricken. She couldn't stay, not another minute, not with the fragile life growing inside her. Her cramped Brooklyn walk-up, usually a sanctuary of sorts, now felt like a cage. Her hands, still trembling, fumbled with the worn zipper of her duffel bag. Inside, a change of clothes, a few precious photos from her foster years, and the crumpled bus ticket to a small coastal town. The sonogram picture was tucked safe in her bra, a warm weight against her skin. This was it, her only chance. She moved with a desperate urgency, the ache in her back intensifying with every hurried movement. The stairs creaked under her weight, each step a pounding drumbeat against her mounting panic. Outside, the city was a blur of noise and light, but all Rose could focus on was the bus station, a beacon of escape in the swirling chaos. She clutched the bus ticket so tightly the paper softened in her sweating palm. The bus station was a vast, echoing space, filled with the murmurs of travelers and the distant hiss of air brakes. Rose found her gait, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. The bus was already boarding, its open door a gaping maw, promising freedom. She joined the short line, her breath catching in her throat, a sliver of hope finally blossoming. She was almost there, almost safe. Then a shadow fell over her. It wasn't just one shadow, but several, moving with a silent, synchronized efficiency that spoke of training and absolute authority. Men, dark-suited and grim-faced, materialized from the periphery of her vision, surrounding the small group of passengers. They weren't looking at anyone else. Their eyes, cold and unyielding, were fixed solely on her. Rose's blood ran cold. The bus ticket slipped from her numb fingers, fluttering to the grimy floor. Her carefully constructed escape shattered into a million pieces. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was the end of her run, and then he was there. Liam Moretti stood at the head of the dark-suited men, a silent, immovable monolith of power. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was a command, a force that sucked the air from her lungs and rooted her to the spot. He was taller than she remembered, broader, his shoulders filling the space around him with an intimidating mass. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, found hers, and in their depths Rose saw not anger, but something far more terrifying. Absolute, unyielding possession. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He simply looked at her, and the message was clear, vibrating through her bones. "You are mine." One of his men, a hulking figure with eyes as dead as river stones, bent down and retrieved the crumpled bus ticket. He didn't hand it to Rose. Instead, he presented it to Liam, who took it with a slow, deliberate movement. Liam's fingers, large and powerful, dwarfed the small piece of paper. He tore it in half, slowly, meticulously, without taking his gaze from Rose. The sound was soft, yet it resonated in her ears like a death knell for her dreams. Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. He knew everything, her name, her secret, her desperate, foolish plan. There was no hiding from him, no outrunning the reach of his world. Liam then extended a hand towards her, not an invitation, but a silent, undeniable order. His palm was broad, his fingers long, capable of both immense strength and, she imagined, terrifying gentleness. Rose felt a strange, dizzying mix of fear and an almost magnetic pull towards that unwavering hand. She was utterly at his mercy, every instinct screaming at her to flee, yet a deeper, more primal part of her already knew resistance was futile. She looked at his eyes again, those dark, intense pools that promised both danger and an undeniable, terrifying safety. He was a hunter, and she was his prey. But in that moment, as her world crumbled, Rose felt a strange, unsettling sense of inevitability. She was caught, bound, and in the sheer, overwhelming power radiating from him, she felt an odd, dizzying sense of protection. There was no escape, only him, and perhaps for the first time she wouldn't have to face the world alone. Slowly, her hand, small and trembling, reached for his. The drive to Liam Moretti's estate felt endless, a journey deeper and deeper into a world Rose had only glimpsed from the shadows. The city lights eventually gave way to a darker landscape, then to the imposing wrought-iron gates of what could only be described as a fortress. They were immense, intricately designed, yet undeniably formidable, flanked by stone pillars that seemed to scrape the night sky. Rose watched them swing open with a silent, heavy grace, revealing not a driveway, but a long, winding path through manicured grounds, all enclosed by an impossibly tall chain-link fence that stretched as far as her eyes could see, disappearing into the darkness. Armed men, indistinguishable in their dark uniforms, stood at strategic points, their gazes sharp and unwavering. Rose shivered, pressing herself deeper into the plush leather seat of the luxurious car. This wasn't just a home, it was a stronghold built to repel any threat. And she was now inside it, a captured bird in a gilded cage. The car pulled up to a sprawling mansion that glowed with a warm, inviting light, utterly at odds with the intimidating exterior. It was a masterpiece of architecture, all gleaming marble and intricate stonework, a stark contrast to the cramped, grimy diner and her tiny walk-up apartment. But the opulence offered no comfort. It only amplified her sense of being utterly out of place, a trespasser in a world that dwarfed her in every conceivable way. The heavy, ornate doors of the estate swung open as if on cue, revealing a grand foyer. Rose stepped out of the car, her knees weak, her heart still a frantic drum against her ribs. She was led inside by a silent, efficient woman, past soaring ceilings and gleaming floors, into a suite of rooms that took her breath away. A massive bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in rich fabrics, a private sitting area, and a bathroom larger than her entire previous apartment. Everything was lavish, expensive, impossibly beautiful. But the beauty was a cruel mockery of her situation. She was a prisoner, albeit one surrounded by luxury. There were no locks on her doors, but she knew with a chilling certainty that leaving was not an option. The heavy doors that had closed behind her, sealing her within, felt like a final, unyielding declaration. A new figure appeared, quiet and unobtrusive, a woman with kind eyes but a posture that spoke of unwavering vigilance. "My name is Elena," she said softly, her voice the first gentle sound Rose had heard in hours. "I am here to ensure your comfort and safety. Whatever you need, just ask." Elena was her personal silent guard, Rose understood. A constant shadow, a reminder that every movement, every breath was observed. Liam was not there. He hadn't been since he'd torn her bus ticket, hadn't spoken another word to her. Yet his presence permeated every corner of the estate. He was the unseen, undisputed ruler, his authority a palpable force in the very air she breathed. His rules, unspoken but clearly understood, were absolute. She would obey, she would not question, she would not attempt to leave. Rose wandered her opulent prison, her fingers trailing over silken drapes and polished wood. She felt a profound loss, a crushing weight of freedom stolen. Her gentle nature, accustomed to scraping by on her own terms, was utterly overwhelmed by the harsh reality of his world. She was alone, but no longer in control of her solitude. As the first day bled into night, a strange realization began to dawn. Despite the fear, despite the terrifying power Liam wielded, she was undeniably safe. The fortress-like estate, the armed men, Elena's quiet watch. It was all for her. The luxurious food, the comfortable bed, the meticulous care shown for her every physical need, all flowed from his unseen hand. He wasn't cruel to her, he simply was. His control, while absolute and suffocating, was also a formidable shield. She thought of the terror that had driven her from the diner, the lurking threats in the outside world, the rival cartel hinted at in the intercepted bus ticket. Here, within these impenetrable walls, she was protected from it all. The chain-link fences, once a symbol of her capture, now seemed like a boundary against chaos, a barrier that kept the dangers of the world at bay. It was a terrifying thought, but as she laid in the vast, soft bed, the quiet hum of the estate's security systems a low lullaby, Rose felt a nascent, unsettling sense of peace. Liam Moretti had taken her freedom, but he had also, undeniably, taken her into his absolute protection. Days bled into a week, then another, within the opulent confines of Liam Moretti's estate. Rose navigated the sprawling rooms, a ghost in silk and cashmere, her movements still hesitant, her spirit still chafing against the invisible bars of her gilded cage. The initial shock had given way to a dull ache of resignation, but with each passing day, a strange, unsettling comfort began to take root. She was a prisoner, yes, but a prisoner meticulously cared for. The meals that arrived in her suite were not just nourishing, they were exquisite, prepared with a delicate attention to detail she'd never known. Fresh fruit, rich broths, tender meats, all designed for a pregnant woman, she realized. A silent testament to the unseen hand guiding every aspect of her captivity. Elena, her quiet shadow, ensured she saw doctors and specialists, not in some sterile clinic, but within the estate's own medical wing. These were the best, Rose understood, their hushed voices always reassuring, their instruments state-of-the-art. No expense was spared for her or for the tiny life within her. The guards, ever present, no longer felt like jailers. They were a perimeter, a shield. Their watchful eyes, once a source of terror, now seemed to scan the horizon for threats that might breach the fortress that held her. They were there for her, she slowly realized, not just to keep her in. The heavy chain-link fences, the armed men patrolling the grounds, they were not just symbols of her lost freedom, but also a formidable barrier against the dangerous world Liam commanded, the world she had so foolishly tried to escape. Liam himself was often absent, a phantom lord of the manor. His empire, she gathered from the snippets of hushed conversations Elena inadvertently let slip, demanded his constant attention. Yet his presence was a palpable force, woven into the very fabric of the estate. Every decision, every provision, every layer of security bore his indelible mark. When he did appear, it was sudden, unannounced, a silent storm entering a room. One afternoon, she found herself in the expansive library, drawn to a wall of ancient leather-bound books. She was tracing the spine of a particularly old volume when the air shifted, and she knew he was there. Liam stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the sunlit hall, his frame filling the space with an intimidating breadth. He didn't speak immediately, simply watched her, his dark eyes intense, assessing. Rose's heart quickened, a familiar tremor running through her. "The doctor tells me you're doing well," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that resonated deep within her chest. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, a confirmation of his unwavering oversight. His tone was direct, commanding, devoid of warmth, yet there was an undeniable undercurrent beneath the words, a thread of concern for her health, for the baby's well-being. Rose found herself nodding, a small, involuntary movement of submission. "Yes, Liam," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. She instinctively brought a hand to her belly, a silent acknowledgement of the life they both now shared. He walked further into the room, a slow, deliberate stride that commanded the very floorboards beneath his feet. He stopped at a massive mahogany desk, his large, ruthless fist briefly resting on its polished surface. For a fleeting moment, Rose caught a glimpse of something dark and intricate wrapped around his knuckles. Rosary beads. The sight was a stark juxtaposition, the symbol of a devout faith, intertwined with the raw, brutal power of his hand. It was a chilling image, a quiet reminder of the complex man who held her fate in his grasp. "Good," he said, his gaze still fixed on her, unwavering. "You will continue to follow their instructions. Absolutely. Your health and the child's are paramount." There was no room for debate, no space for questions. It was a directive, an order. And for the first time, Rose found herself not resenting it, but finding a strange, quiet strength in his unwavering control. His demands were absolute, but so was his provision, his protection. She was safe here, undeniably. He was keeping her safe in a way she never could have done alone. In that moment, she understood a profound truth. His authority, while overwhelming, was also her shield, and she instinctively, quietly, began to yield to it. The gilded cage had begun to feel less like a prison and more like an undeniable sanctuary. Rose had settled into the estate's rhythm, a quiet existence defined by luxurious provisions and unyielding security. The thought of the harsh, unpredictable world outside now brought a shiver of unease. Here, within Liam's walls, she was untouched by its dangers. She still grappled with the loss of her freedom, but a deeper, more primal instinct recognized the profound safety his absolute control offered. She was in her private sitting room, a book forgotten in her lap, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. The baby stirred, a gentle flutter that always brought a soft smile to her lips. It was a secret world, just her and this precious life, shielded by the impenetrable might of the man who owned them both. The door to her suite opened without a knock. Rose's breath caught. Liam Moretti stood there, filling the doorway, his presence an immediate, overwhelming force. He was dressed in a dark suit, impeccably tailored, making him seem even larger, more formidable. His dark eyes, usually cold and assessing, settled solely on her. He walked into the room, his stride slow and deliberate, each step resonating with unspoken power. Rose watched him, a quiet tremor starting deep within her. He stopped before her, casting a long shadow that enveloped her entirely. The sheer, undeniable power radiating from his frame was breathtaking. "Rose," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through her, stirring something deep and unsettling, yet also strangely compelling. It was a sound that commanded attention, that demanded obedience. There was no question in his tone, just a statement of undeniable fact. "The child is mine," he stated, his gaze unwavering, pinning her in place. "My heir." Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to argue, to claim some shred of autonomy, but the words died in her throat. His declaration wasn't a request, it was a pronouncement. It was the absolute, unyielding truth. He owned this world, and by extension, he owned everything within it, including her and the life she carried. He then reached out, his large hand, capable of such ruthlessness, coming to rest gently, almost reverently, over her belly. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, yet the touch was surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to the power he exuded. Rose instinctively covered his hand with her own, her fingers small and delicate beneath his. The contact sent a jolt through her, a strange mixture of fear and an undeniable magnetic pull. "And you," he continued, his voice dropping to a lower, more intimate tone, though no less commanding, "are mine, both of you. You are off limits to the world, to anyone else." The words hung in the air, a terrifying and utterly comforting promise. Off limits. It wasn't a threat directed at her, but a declaration to the world, a boundary he was drawing with his own formidable power. He was claiming them, not just as possessions, but as extensions of himself, things he would protect with every brutal capability he possessed. Rose looked up into his eyes, searching for something beyond cold possessiveness. She found no softness, no tender affection, not in the way she might have once dreamed. But she found something else, something far more profound and unyielding, absolute protection. His possessiveness, overwhelming as it was her ultimate shield. It was the guarantee that no harm would ever reach them, that he would stand between them and any threat. A profound sense of inevitability settled over her. She had run, she had fought, but in his presence, surrounded by his power, she finally understood. She wasn't alone. She never would be again. This absolute control, this unwavering claim, was her new reality, her new safety. Slowly, her small hand, still resting over his on her belly, tightened slightly. a silent, almost imperceptible gesture of acceptance. Her gaze, soft and unwavering, met his. She nodded, a quiet, profound surrender. This was her path now, defined by his strength, protected by his ruthlessness. She yielded not out of fear alone, but with a growing understanding that in his absolute claim, she had finally found an unshakable haven. She was his, and in that terrifying, exhilarating truth, she was finally safe. The gilded cage had begun to feel less like a prison and more like an undeniable sanctuary. Rose had settled into the estate's rhythm, a quiet existence defined by luxurious provisions and unyielding security. The thought of the harsh, unpredictable world outside now brought a shiver of unease. Here, within Liam's walls, she was untouched by its dangers. She still grappled with the loss of her freedom, but a deeper, more primal instinct recognized the profound safety his absolute control offered. She was in her private sitting room, a book forgotten in her lap, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. The baby stirred, a gentle flutter that always brought a soft smile to her lips. It was a secret world, just her and this precious life, shielded by the impenetrable might of the man who owned them both. Then, the subtle shift began. It started with a change in the air, a tightening of the unseen threads that held the estate together. Elena, usually a quiet, comforting presence, moved with a newfound urgency, her soft eyes betraying a flicker of concern Rose hadn't seen before. Overheard conversations among the guards grew hushed, their voices low, punctuated by words Rose only vaguely understood. Bronx, cartel, Moretti territory. One evening, while Elena helped her choose a dress for dinner, the television in the corner, usually tuned to a serene nature channel, displayed a frantic news report. A local reporter, breathless, spoke of escalating gang violence in the city, of a rival faction making aggressive moves, challenging established power. Rose watched, a cold dread creeping into her stomach. This was the world Liam inhabited, the world she had foolishly believed she could escape. Liam himself became an even more distant figure. He was a whirlwind of activity, his presence felt everywhere but rarely seen. Doors slammed, phones rang with a relentless insistence, and the low hum of constant strategic communication filled the air. She knew he was consumed by it, by the external threat that now pressed against the very gates of their fortress. The estate, already formidable, transformed. The number of armed men patrolling the grounds visibly increased, their movements sharper, their gazes more vigilant as they scanned the perimeter. Floodlights, usually only active at night, now cast stark beams into the twilight hours. The intricate chain-link fences, already a barrier, seemed to hum with a new, reinforced energy, a palpable declaration that nothing would breach these walls. Rose felt a renewed surge of fear, but it was different now. It wasn't fear of Liam, but fear for what lay outside, and an overwhelming gratitude for the formidable shield he provided. She remembered the crumpled bus ticket, the fleeting hope of escape, and the chilling certainty that the rival cartel was the very entity that had intercepted her desperate plan. If she had succeeded in running, she would have been utterly exposed, vulnerable and alone. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her, making her clutch her belly instinctively. Liam's demands for her safety, always absolute, became even more stringent. Elena ensured Rose stayed within her suite, venturing out only for supervised walks in a heavily secured garden. There were no questions, no discussions, just directives, delivered through Elena with unwavering clarity, and Rose complied, her yielding now truly innate, a quiet, almost unconscious act of self-preservation. She found herself relying completely on his strength, on his unwavering control. The sight of the guards, their eyes fixed on the distant tree line, the unsettling sound of sirens wailing somewhere far off in the city, all served to underscore the dangers that lurked beyond their sanctuary. Here, within these walls, she was untouchable. He was a ruthless man, a terrifying man, but he was her ruthless, terrifying protector. And in the escalating chaos of the world outside, Rose felt a profound, unwavering certainty. She was safest precisely where he wanted her to be. The air within the estate grew thick with an unspoken tension, a silent hum of impending storm. Rose felt it in the way Elena's soft steps became quicker, in the way the guards outside her bullet-proofed windows seemed to hold their breath. The distant wail of sirens, once unsettling, now seemed ominously close, a constant reminder of the chaos that pressed against Liam's formidable walls. She was kept inside her suite, the heavy doors a barrier against not just escape, but also against the escalating danger. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky, painting the fortified grounds in hues of purple and grey, a sudden tremor shook the estate. It wasn't an earthquake, but something sharp, violent and man-made. Rose gasped, clutching her belly, her heart leaping into her throat. A muffled explosion, distant but powerful, vibrated through the floorboards, followed by the sharp staccato crack of gunfire. Fear, cold and immediate, gripped her. She pressed herself against the reinforced glass of her window, peering out into the fading light, but saw nothing beyond the meticulously maintained gardens and the unyielding chain-link fences. The sounds were coming from beyond, from the world Liam commanded, the world that was now actively trying to breach his defenses. Elena, who had been quietly arranging flowers, moved swiftly, her face pale but determined. She drew the heavy, sound-dampening drapes, plunging the room into a muted, cloistered silence. "It's all right, Rose," she said, her voice strained but firm. "You are safe here, completely safe." But Rose knew it wasn't entirely all right. She could feel the ripple of urgency, the frantic energy that now permeated every corner of the vast mansion. She heard the low, guttural roar of Liam's voice from somewhere far below, issuing orders that were sharp, decisive, and terrifyingly final. He was a force unleashed, a predator defending his territory. Hours passed in a blur of terrifying uncertainty. The sounds of conflict outside eventually faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. But the tension remained, a palpable weight in the air. Rose paced her opulent prison, her mind reeling. She imagined Liam out there, in the thick of it, his ruthlessness honed to a razor's edge, eliminating threats with terrifying efficiency. She pictured his grim, determined jaw, the way his eyes would narrow, devoid of anything but cold purpose. He never came to her suite, never offered a word of reassurance directly, but his presence was felt in every tightened security measure, every hushed report Elena gave her. He was ensuring she was kept completely safe, isolated from the violence, shielded by layers of protection that few could ever penetrate. The very air around her seemed to harden, turning her rooms into an impregnable sanctuary. Rose found herself trembling, not just from fear of the outside world, but from the sheer, overwhelming power Liam wielded. It was a power that created chaos and destruction, but it was also the power that kept her untouchable. He was a ruthless keeper, but his ruthlessness was directed outwards, a savage defense of what was his. And she and the baby within her were undeniably his. She thought of the men who had dared to challenge him, the rival cartel that had once seemed a distant, abstract threat. Now she understood the immediacy of the danger and the absolute necessity of Liam's brutal response. Her gentle nature recoiled from the thought of violence, yet a deeper, more primal part of her recognized the undeniable safety it afforded. Here, under his merciless protection, she was secure. Her belief in his capacity to protect her, to protect them, deepened with every passing hour of that terrifying night. The contrast between his harsh, unforgiving environment and her own gentle, vulnerable state was stark, yet she was no longer a frightened victim. She was sheltered, cherished in a terrifying, possessive way, as the first rays of dawn finally pierced through the heavy drapes, illuminating the unblemished opulence of her room. Rose knew, with a quiet certainty, that she was profoundly safe within his sphere. Liam Moretti was a devil, but he was her devil, and he would burn the world down to keep her out of harm's way. The air within the estate had settled back into a tense quiet after the recent skirmish, but Rose's heart still thrummed with residual fear. She knew Liam had met the threat with swift, brutal force, ensuring her safety, yet the echoes of distant gunfire still haunted her nights. She sat by the window in her suite, the heavy drapes now drawn back, revealing the formidable chain-link fences that guarded their world. She traced the intricate patterns on the glass, a prisoner in luxury, yet undeniably safe. Elena entered, her movements silent as always, carrying a small, silver tray. On it, nestled amongst delicate pastries and a cup of herbal tea, lay something small, crumpled, and achingly familiar. Rose's breath hitched. It was the bus ticket. Her bus ticket, the one Liam had torn in half, the symbol of her desperate, foolish attempt at freedom. Now, it was neatly taped back together, placed almost deliberately for her to find. "Liam found it," Elena said softly, her voice gentle, yet her eyes held a depth of sorrow Rose hadn't seen before. "He keeps it, as a reminder of her flight, of her defiance." Rose felt a flush of shame, but also a flicker of curiosity. Why would he keep it? Elena sat opposite her, her posture unusually tense. "There was an informant," she began, her gaze fixed on the bus ticket. "Someone who told the cartel about your plans, your destination. They were waiting for you." Rose felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the implication. Someone knew. Someone had told them. The only people who had known about her escape were a few trusted individuals. Her mind immediately went to the one person she had confided in most, the only one who truly knew her dreams of a quiet life by the sea. "Who?" Rose whispered, her voice barely audible, a terrible premonition forming in her chest. Elena hesitated, her soft eyes meeting Rose's. "Your foster sister, Clara. She sold you out, Rose, for a small sum. She knew what would happen if you fell into their hands, how vulnerable you and the baby would be, yet she took the money anyway." The words struck Rose like a physical blow. Clara, the woman she had shared her childhood with, the only family she had ever truly known, the one person she had trusted with her deepest fears, her most fragile hopes. A wave of nausea, worse than any morning sickness, washed over her. Betrayal, sharp and agonizing, tore through her heart. It wasn't just her escape that had been compromised. It was her entire belief in human kindness, in the loyalty of those she held dear. The bus ticket lying on the tray no longer symbolized hope, but a chilling reminder of how close she had come to disaster, thanks to someone she loved. Her initial perception of Liam as a villain, as the one she needed to escape, shattered completely. He had dragged her back, yes, but he had dragged her back from a far worse fate. A fate orchestrated by her own trusted friend. Her world, already small, now felt utterly isolated, with only Liam's formidable presence standing between her and a hostile, treacherous outside. Elena, seeing the raw pain on Rose's face, reached out, gently covering Rose's trembling hand. "There's something else you should know, Rose," she said, her voice dropping to a low, earnest tone. "Something Liam would never tell you himself." Rose looked up, her eyes wide and tear-filled. "Years ago, before you even knew him, before you worked at the diner, there was an investigation," Elena continued, her gaze unwavering. "A trafficking ring, targeting vulnerable young women. Your name, it was on a list. Liam found out. He moved heaven and earth. He took a murder charge for a man he didn't kill, ensuring that your name, your past, was completely erased from that investigation. He protected you then, Rose. He has always protected you, long before you ever carried his child. The revelation was a hammer blow, shattering the last vestiges of Rose's preconceived notions. A murder charge. For her, to erase her name, to save her from a fate she hadn't even known she'd been facing. Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. The depth of his protection, his ruthless, unwavering commitment, was so profound, so absolute, that it defied comprehension. He wasn't just her captor. He was her rescuer, her silent guardian, from dangers she'd never even perceived. A quiet click of the door. Liam stood there, as if summoned by the weight of the revelation. He didn't speak, didn't move further into the room, his dark eyes, usually so unreadable, fixed on Rose. There was no anger, no triumph, only a quiet, knowing look that acknowledged her pain, her profound isolation, and his own unwavering, brutal protection. He saw her, truly saw her, stripped bare of all illusions. Rose looked at the crumpled bus ticket, then at Elena's compassionate face, then back at Liam. The world outside those formidable walls was a place of betrayal and unseen horrors. The world within, governed by his absolute power, was the only true haven. Her initial fear of him, her desperate need to escape, had been a terrible, naive mistake. He was not the monster. He was the shield. A profound sense of peace, cold and absolute, settled over her. She felt a deep, unwavering certainty solidify within her. There was no other choice, no other safety, only him. In that moment, Rose Sterling understood, with every fibre of her being, that her only true safety, her only future, lay in his terrifying, possessive embrace. She was truly his, and in that terrifying, exhilarating truth, she was finally safe. The air within the estate had tightened into a drum-taut silence, a stark contrast to the distant, unsettling sounds that now drifted in from beyond its formidable walls. Rose felt the change in every nerve ending, the low thrum of the estate's advanced security systems, once a subtle background hum, now vibrated through the very floorboards, a constant, watchful presence. She was confined to the innermost, most heavily fortified part of the mansion, a suite of rooms deep within the main structure, designed to be impregnable. She spent her days by a window, the bullet-proofed glass, a thick, unyielding barrier between her and the escalating conflict outside. Sometimes she would hear it, a faint, sharp crack that might have been a gunshot or the more muffled, distant thud of an explosion. News reports, filtered through Elena's cautious updates, spoke of escalating skirmishes in the Bronx warehouses Liam controlled, of a rival cartel pushing aggressively into his territory. The world was on fire, and she was in the eye of the storm, protected by the very man who commanded it. Liam was a whirlwind of action, a force of nature unleashed. She rarely saw him, but his presence was a palpable, terrifying weight in the estate. Doors opened and closed with urgency. Voices, sharp and low, echoed from the distant command center. She imagined him there, grim-faced, issuing orders that would determine fates, his mind a steel trap of strategy and ruthless calculation. He was protecting his empire, yes, but she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that he was also protecting them. Her, their baby. They were his ultimate priority. One afternoon, a sharp, prolonged burst of gunfire erupted closer than anything before, followed by the screech of tires and a cacophony of shouts. Rose gasped, pressing a hand to her swollen belly, her heart leaping with a primal fear. Elena, ever present, immediately drew the heavy, sound-dampening drapes, plunging the room into a muted twilight. "You are safe, Rose," she murmured, her voice calm but her eyes betraying a profound concern. "He is handling it." Rose believed her. She had to. Her trust in Liam's methods, however brutal, was now absolute. She no longer questioned his need for control, his ruthlessness. She understood it. These were the lengths he would go to protect what was his. And she and the life within her were undeniably his. Her fear was not of him, but for the world he fought, and the safety he provided. Later that evening, after the sounds of conflict had subsided, a quiet knock came at her door. Eleanor opened it, and Liam stood there. He was still in his dark suit, but it was rumpled, his tie slightly askew. A faint smudge of grime darkened one cheekbone, and his dark hair was a little disheveled. He looked tired, perhaps, but his eyes were sharp, intense, burning with an unwavering focus. He didn't speak, didn't move further into the room. He simply stood there, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing, confirming. Rose felt a strange sense of calm settle over her at the sight of him. Amidst the chaos of the world, he was an anchor, unmoving and unbreakable. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, held hers, and in their depths she saw not just the grim determination of a man at war, but a profound, possessive concern that was solely for her. He took a deep breath, a slow, deliberate act that seemed to gather the immense power within him. He simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, but Rose understood. It was his silent communication, his promise that she was secure, that he would not let anything touch them. He was a whirlwind of action, but his focus on her, even in this brief, silent moment, was absolute. Rose offered him a small, quiet smile, a silent gesture of support, of unwavering trust. She knew she couldn't fight his battles for him, couldn't stand by his side in the violent world he commanded. But she could offer him this, her absolute obedience, her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in his protection. He held her gaze for another long moment, his eyes intense, then turned and left as silently as he had arrived. The door clicked shut, sealing her back into her sanctuary. The low thrum of the security systems seemed to deepen, a constant reassuring pulse. Rose touched her belly, feeling the gentle flutter within. Liam was out there, grim-faced, issuing commands, fighting a war. But here, within his formidable walls, under his unwavering gaze, she was profoundly, undeniably safe. His brutal world was her shield, and she trusted him with everything. The weeks that followed the skirmishes had settled into a new, profound quiet within the estate. But Rose's heart pulsed with a different kind of intensity. She was now heavily pregnant, her belly a beautiful, undeniable testament to the life growing within her. The baby moved often, a gentle ballet beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the precious future Liam protected with such fierce, terrifying devotion. Her fears of him had long since dissolved, replaced by a deep, almost reverent understanding of his powerful claim. One afternoon, a restless energy stirred within her. Elena was tending to other matters, and Rose found herself wandering the quieter, seldom-used wings of the mansion. Her fingers trailed along polished wood, her gaze drifting over tapestries and forgotten artworks. A particular door, tucked away behind a grand, unused staircase, caught her eye. It seemed out of place, subtly different from the others. Curiosity, stronger than any lingering apprehension, tugged at her. She pushed the door open, a soft click echoing in the silence. The room beyond was not a study, nor a sitting room, nor another lavish bedroom. It was bathed in a gentle, soft light, the walls painted in a calming, muted shade of cream. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat. It was a nursery. A handcrafted wooden crib stood against one wall, its mattress meticulously made, a tiny, soft blanket folded neatly at its foot. Above it, suspended from the ceiling, a delicate baby mobile swayed gently in an unseen draught. Tiny carved stars and moons dancing in the air. A rocking chair, upholstered in a soft, plush fabric, sat by a window, a small, worn teddy bear resting on its seat. There were shelves filled with picture books, a changing table with neatly stacked diapers, and a wardrobe filled with impossibly tiny clothes. Rose stepped inside, her movements slow, reverent. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, her fingers tracing the curve of her child's home. Tears pricked at her eyes, blurring her vision. This wasn't a room assembled in haste or a mere afterthought. This was a space meticulously planned, lovingly prepared. Every detail, from the soft rug on the floor to the little lamp shaped like a friendly cloud, spoke of anticipation, of hope, of an undeniable future. She walked to the window, her gaze drawn to the mobile still swaying above the crib. It was a beautiful, tender sight. Then she noticed the window itself. It was thick, reinforced, its glass bulletproofed, just like the windows in her own suite. The contrast was stark, poignant, fragile new life, protected by immense strength. A symbol of his world and their place in it. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, shattering every last doubt she had ever harbored. He hadn't been building a golden cage for her. He hadn't planned to get rid of her once the baby was born, as her terrified, naive mind had once whispered. He had been building this, a sanctuary for their child, a home. His plan, his true intentions, had been laid out before her, not in words, but in the quiet, undeniable language of this hidden room. It was then, standing in the soft glow of the nursery, that the full picture of Liam Moretti, her ruthless protector, clicked into place. She remembered Eleanor's words, the revelation of him taking a murder charge years ago to erase her name from a trafficking investigation that would have swallowed her whole. He had protected her then, a ghost in her past, long before he had ever truly known her. He had protected her from Clara's betrayal, from the rival cartel, and now he had built this, a testament to the future he envisioned for them. Her fear transformed, completely and irrevocably, into something profound, something akin to an overwhelming love and absolute trust. She wasn't just safe, she was cherished, in a way she had never dared to dream. Liam's possessiveness wasn't a chain, it was an unbreakable shield, forged from his brutal will and his undeniable love. Rose reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched the impossibly soft fabric of a tiny, folded blanket in the crib. It was an unspoken commitment, a silent declaration of the depth of his devotion. She had sought safety by the sea, a quiet, peaceful life. She had found it, but it was within these walls, within the formidable, terrifying, yet utterly protective embrace of Liam Moretti. She was his. The child was his, and in this secret, beautiful room, Rose finally understood that there was no greater protection, no greater love than the one he ruthlessly offered. She was truly home. The external world continued its relentless assault, the whispers of conflict still a constant undercurrent beneath the estate's formidable calm. Liam remained a whirlwind of action, consumed by strategy. His ruthless will, the only thing standing between his empire and the encroaching chaos. Yet, in these turbulent days, Rose found her own quiet purpose, a new strength blooming within her. She was no longer just the protected, she was becoming his anchor, a still point in his storm. She spent her days in the sunlit nursery, the room now a vibrant, living testament to their future, no longer just a secret hope. She would smooth the tiny blankets, arrange the soft clothes, her hands gently caressing her swollen belly as the baby within her stirred with increasing vigor. The life growing inside her was a beacon, a soft, unwavering light in the dark world Liam commanded. Her trust in him was absolute, forged in the crucible of his brutal protection and the profound revelation of his hidden care. She no longer fought his decisions. She embraced them, understanding that his absolute control was not a cage, but the very foundation of their safety. Liam's visits were brief, snatched moments of respite from the relentless demands of his war. He would appear in the nursery, often unannounced, his dark suit rumpled, his eyes heavy with the weight of leadership, yet always finding hers first. He never spoke of the battles raging outside, never burdened her with the grim details of his world. Instead, he would simply stand there, watching her, watching the gentle swell of her belly, his presence a heavy, comforting weight in the quiet room. One afternoon, he found her in the rocking chair, a soft hum on her lips as she swayed gently, her hand resting on her belly. He walked over, his steps silent, and stopped beside her. The air around him crackled with a barely contained energy, a tension that spoke of endless calculations and imminent threats. Rose looked up, meeting his intense gaze, and offered a soft, unwavering smile. There were no words needed, no explanations. She simply was, a quiet strength for him to draw upon. He reached out, his large, powerful hand, rough with the undeniable marks of his dangerous life, gently covering her own where it rested on her belly. His palm was warm, a stark contrast to her softer skin, but the contact was grounding, a silent promise of unwavering connection. Rose didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent declaration of her complete trust, her unshakable devotion. She felt the subtle tremor in his hand, a hint of the immense pressure he bore, and in that moment she understood her role. She was his solace, his quiet strength, the one place where he could momentarily shed the weight of his world. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly as he looked from her eyes to her belly, then back again. It was a fleeting glimpse into the depth of his devotion, a raw, protective tenderness that he showed to no one else. He didn't ask for her support, he simply absorbed it, drawing quiet strength from her presence, from the silent promise of future and hope that she embodied. "Are you well?" he asked. His voice a low, gravelly rumble, softer than she had ever heard it, stripped of its usual commanding edge. It was a question born of genuine concern, a rare vulnerability that only she was privy to. "Yes, Liam," she whispered, her voice a soft caress, her eyes full of a quiet, profound acceptance. "We are well, safe." He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, his hand still covering hers on her belly. The intertwining of their hands, his rough and powerful, hers soft and nurturing, was a powerful symbol of their unbreakable bond. He was the protector, the unwavering force, and she was the life he protected, the calm in his storm, giving him purpose and strength he found nowhere else. She yielded to him completely, not out of fear, but out of a deep, abiding love and a profound understanding that in his ruthless world, her complete submission to his protection was the greatest strength she could offer him. It was their quiet anchor, holding them steady against the brewing storm. The quiet strength Rose had found, the serene anchor she offered Liam, was suddenly utterly shattered by a different kind of storm. It began subtly, a deep, unfamiliar ache in her lower back that tightened, then released, then tightened again with increasing intensity. She was in the nursery, humming a soft tune to her swollen belly, when the first undeniable wave gripped her. Her breath hitched, her fingers digging into the edge of the crib. This wasn't the baby stirring, this was it. Elena, ever watchful, noticed the sudden pallor of Rose's face, the sharp intake of breath. Her soft eyes widened with immediate understanding. "Rose, is it time?" Rose could only nod, a small, choked sound escaping her lips as another contraction seized her, pulling her entire body into its powerful grip. The world outside, with its distant threats and skirmishes, faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the overwhelming, primal force now taking hold of her body. Within moments, the estate shifted into a new, urgent rhythm. Elena, swift and efficient, ushered Rose to her suite, where a team of medical professionals, brought in specifically for this moment, were already preparing. Liam, summoned with a hushed urgency, arrived almost instantly. He filled the doorway, his dark suit impeccable despite the hour, his eyes intense, sweeping over the scene with an unwavering focus that overrode all other concerns. He didn't speak, but his presence was a command, a silent declaration that nothing, absolutely nothing, would interfere with this. He stood at the foot of the bed, a silent, imposing figure. Rose, caught in the throes of labor, found her gaze repeatedly drawn to him. His face was grim, his jaw set, but his eyes, fixed solely on her, held a raw, primal protective instinct she had never seen so clearly. She was profoundly vulnerable, exposed in a way she had never been, yet in his unwavering gaze, she felt an undeniable, terrifying safety. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and effort. Rose pushed, her body screaming, her mind focused on the life she was bringing into the world. Each contraction was a brutal journey, but between them, Liam's gaze was her anchor. He never left her side, never wavered. The medical team moved with quiet efficiency, their hushed voices offering calm instructions, but it was Liam's silent strength that truly enveloped her. He was a rock in a churning sea, his absolute command of the situation, a shield against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She caught a glimpse of his hand, large and powerful, resting on the bedside table. His knuckles were white and intertwined around his fingers. Almost swallowed by his ruthless fist were his rosary beads. He was praying, she realized, a silent, desperate plea for their safety, for the safe arrival of their child. The image struck her with a profound force. The ruthless Don, a man of violence and absolute power, reduced to silent prayer, his entire being focused on her, on them. Then, with one final agonizing push, a new cry pierced the air. It was a small sound, fragile and urgent, yet it cut through the tension of the estate, through the lingering echoes of conflict, through Rose's exhaustion like a pure, sweet bell, her baby. A profound wave of relief, of overwhelming love, washed over her, eclipsing every pain. The doctor gently placed the tiny, wailing bundle on her chest. Rose looked down, tears blurring her vision. A perfect miniature face, red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair. Their child. Her heart swelled, a fierce, protective love blossoming within her. She looked up at Liam, who had taken a step closer, his eyes still fixed on them, now holding a wonder she had never thought possible. His face, usually so impassive, was etched with a raw emotion she couldn't quite decipher. A mixture of awe and an even deeper, more terrifying possessiveness. He reached out, his finger, usually so commanding, impossibly gentle as he brushed it against the baby's cheek. The newborn latched onto his finger, a tiny, surprising grip. Liam's gaze, intense and unwavering, met Rose's. There was no need for words. In that moment, holding their precious child, Rose understood. The stakes had just been raised immeasurably. Their baby, so new, so vulnerable, was now the very heart of Liam's formidable world. She clutched their child closer, feeling the fragile weight against her chest. Outside, the storm still raged. The rival cartel still sought to breach Liam's empire. But here, within his absolute protection, holding the new life they had created, Rose knew with terrifying certainty that Liam Moretti was their only shield, and she would never let him go. The pre-dawn gloom hung heavy over the dockyard, a suffocating blanket of grey and black. Rain, fine and relentless, slicked the asphalt, turning the world into a shimmering, distorted canvas. Rose, nestled in the heavily armored vehicle, clutched their newborn son close to her chest, the soft warmth of his tiny body a fragile comfort against the gnawing chill of dread. Liam had insisted on moving them to an even more secure location, a safe house on the outskirts of the city after the birth. She trusted his judgment implicitly, a quiet, unwavering faith that had solidified into an unshakable bedrock. But the tension in the air, thick and palpable, was a living thing, a coiled serpent waiting to strike. She watched the rain stream down the bulletproofed window, distorting the flashing lights of the convoy's escort vehicles. 3 black SUVs, silent and formidable, surrounded their own armored sedan. Liam was in the lead vehicle, she knew, his ruthless will already anticipating every threat. Yet her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a primal fear for the precious, vulnerable life she held. Their son, barely a week old, was the very heart of Liam's empire, and Rose knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he was also its most vulnerable point. Suddenly, a deafening explosion ripped through the air, shaking the entire vehicle. Rose cried out, instinctively hunching over her baby, shielding his tiny head with her body. The convoy lurched violently, tires screeching against the slick pavement. Another explosion, closer this time, rattled her teeth. The world outside dissolved into a terrifying cacophony of shattering glass, tearing metal, and the sickening thud of impact. Gunfire erupted then, a terrifying symphony of sharp cracks and rapid-fire bursts. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, a hail of bullets impacting the armored shell of their vehicle with dull, heavy thuds. Rose squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her son tighter, whispering incoherent pleas for his safety. The vehicle spun, then slammed to a halt, throwing her forward against the restraint of her seatbelt. Panic, cold and raw, threatened to consume her. Through the chaos, Rose forced her eyes open, desperate to see, to understand. The bulletproof glass of her window was spiderwebbed with cracks, a testament to the ferocity of the assault. Outside, in the rain-soaked gloom, figures moved like shadows, indistinct and menacing. She could hear the shouts now, guttural and angry, the unmistakable snarl of the rival cartel. They were here for them, for her and the baby. Then she saw him. Liam Moretti was a force of nature unleashed. He was outside, a dark silhouette against the flashing gun muzzles, a blur of terrifying motion. He moved with a feral brutality, breaking jaws, executing men at point-blank range. Rose saw a man go down with a sickening crack, heard a scream cut short. Liam was a whirlwind of violence, a predator defending his territory, his movements precise, deadly, and utterly unyielding. He was everywhere, fighting with a savage intensity that made the other armed men, his own loyal soldiers, seem almost hesitant by comparison. Her breath hitched. He wasn't just directing the fight, he was in it, at the very forefront, a shield against the hail of bullets meant for them. He was using his own body, his own ruthless will, to protect them. The terrifying power he wielded, the very ruthlessness that had once driven her to flee, was now her only hope, their only salvation. Rose watched him, her heart thundering, a strange mix of terror and profound, absolute trust washing over her. She knew, with every fibre of her being, that he would never let them fall. He was a devil, yes, but he was their devil, and he would burn the world down, break every bone, to keep them safe. Another burst of gunfire ripped through the air, closer this time, accompanied by a primal roar that could only have come from Liam. Rose instinctively hunched lower, clutching her baby, her entire being focused on the man who was fighting for their lives. The rain streamed down the shattered window, blurring the terrifying scene, but she could still see him. Moving through the chaos, an unstoppable force. He was their protector, their ruthless keeper, and in that rain-soaked, terrifying dockyard, Rose placed her entire, unwavering faith in the brutal, unwavering strength of Liam Moretti. He was their shield, and she knew with terrifying certainty that he would not break. The air inside the armored vehicle was thick with the acrid smell of burnt rubber and spent gunpowder. Rose, hunched low, her body a desperate shield over her newborn son, could still hear the terrifying symphony of chaos outside. Glass shattered, metal shrieked, and through it all Liam's primal roar, a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated fury. He was a force, a blur of violence in the rain-soaked gloom, dismantling the ambush with a terrifying efficiency that both repelled and utterly captivated her. She saw him through the spider-webbed cracks of the bulletproof window, a dark silhouette moving with impossible speed. A man screamed, then fell with a sickening thud. Another was slammed against a concrete pillar, his body slumping lifelessly. Liam was everywhere, his powerful frame seemingly impervious to the bullets that hailed around him. He moved, not just to fight, but to protect. Rose watched, mesmerized by his raw, savage power, her fear for him battling with an overwhelming certainty that he would not fail. He was using his own body as a shield, putting himself in the direct line of fire, a living, breathing wall against the encroaching danger. Then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the cacophony began to subside. The gunfire sputtered, then died. The shouts faded into whimpers, then silence. The heavy rain continued to fall, washing away the grime and blood, leaving behind an eerie, profound quiet. Rose slowly straightened, her muscles aching, her grip on her son still fiercely tight. Outside, the dockyard was a scene of devastation, twisted metal and still forms littering the ground. Liam stood amidst it all, his dark suit torn, a smear of blood on his cheek, but his posture unyielding, victorious. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, but his eyes, sharp and intense, immediately found hers through the shattered glass. In their depths, she saw not triumph, but a fierce, possessive relief. Just then, another vehicle, unmarked and pristine, pulled into the dockyard. From it emerged a man in a crisp suit, flanked by two others, their movements deliberate, official, a federal agent. Rose's heart gave a lurch. She knew what this meant. The agent approached their vehicle, his expression grave. One of Liam's men, a hulking figure, opened her door with a quiet click. Cold, damp air rushed in, carrying the metallic tang of rain and something else, the scent of death. "Rose Sterling?" the agent asked, his voice calm, professional, yet it held an underlying authority. "My name is Agent Miller. We're here to offer you protection, you and your child. We can get you out of here, away from all of this, away from Liam Moretti. If you testify against him, we can give you a new life, a safe life, a truly free life." Rose looked at the agent, his clean suit, his promise of freedom. It was everything she had once dreamed of, everything she had tried to run towards. The quiet life by the sea, untouched by the darkness of Liam's world. It was an offer to escape the devil, to finally be truly safe. Then her gaze shifted. She looked down at her son, nestled against her chest, so tiny, so vulnerable. His dark hair, like Liam's, was soft against her cheek. She thought of the nursery, meticulously built in secret, the bulletproofed window a silent testament to Liam's unspoken love. She thought of Clara's betrayal, the real danger she had faced. She remembered Liam taking a murder charge to erase her name from a trafficking investigation, protecting her from a horror she hadn't even known existed. She remembered his roar in the rain, his body a shield, his brutal will fighting for their very lives. He stood a few yards away, bloodied, victorious, his eyes still fixed on her, an unwavering, silent question in their depths. He was a ruthless man, a terrifying man, a devil to the world. But he was her devil. He was the one who had always protected her, the one who would burn the world down to keep them safe. The freedom the agent offered felt hollow, fragile, a mirage compared to the formidable, terrifying safety of Liam's absolute claim. Rose looked at Agent Miller, then back at Liam. Her choice was not a choice between good and evil, but between a fragile, uncertain freedom and an absolute, terrifying protection. Her heart made its decision, a quiet, resolute beat. She clutched her newborn son even tighter, her small hand covering his tiny head, and took a deep breath. Then, without a word, without a moment of hesitation, she pushed open the door and quietly, definitively, stepped out of the armored vehicle. Her gaze never left Liam's. She walked towards him, her steps steady, unwavering, until she stood by his side, her body brushing against his, a silent declaration of her unbreakable bond. Liam's eyes, dark and intense, met hers. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a silent confirmation of their connection, his victory, and her choice. Rose's hand, still cradling her baby, reached out, finding his bloodied, powerful hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, sealing her fate, her devotion, and her family. She had chosen her protector, her family, her devil, and in his terrifying embrace, she had never felt more safe. The journey back to the estate was a blur of quiet motion, the armored vehicle a cocoon against the lingering chaos of the world. Rose still felt the damp chill of the dockyard, the metallic tang of rain and fear. But now, nestled beside Liam, holding their sleeping son, a profound sense of peace settled over her. Her choice, made in the face of federal promises and the brutal reality of Liam's world, had been unequivocal. She had stepped to his side, and in that moment had chosen not just a man but an unshakable haven. Back within the formidable walls of the Staten Island estate, the air was different. The tension that had coiled around them for weeks had finally begun to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, watchful calm. The world outside, Rose knew, was undoubtedly reeling from Liam's brutal display of power, his ruthless consolidation of his territory. But within these walls, a new normal was taking root, anchored by the tiny, breathing miracle cradled in her arms. Liam had taken her and the baby directly to their suite. He hadn't spoken much, his face still grim, a faint bruise blooming high on his cheekbone, a silent testament to the battle he had just fought for them. Yet, his every movement, his very presence, radiated an undeniable tenderness when he looked at their son, a possessive awe that softened the harsh lines of his face. He watched as Rose settled the baby into the magnificent bassinet that now stood beside their bed, his dark eyes never leaving the tiny bundle. Later, as the first golden rays of morning light streamed through the bullet-proofed windows, illuminating the opulent room, Rose sat by the window, the baby sleeping soundly in the bassinet. Liam was in his study, the low murmur of his voice occasionally drifting up from below, indicating the bloody business he was already conducting. His empire was secure, his power consolidated, and she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that their future was utterly protected. Elena brought her a light breakfast, her usual quiet efficiency now imbued with a gentle, knowing smile. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared recognition of Rose's choice and its profound implications. Rose was no longer a prisoner in luxury. She was cherished, revered as the mother of Liam Moretti's heir. Her place by his side, once a terrifying inevitability, was now a role she embraced with a quiet strength and an unwavering heart. When Liam finally came to her, it was late morning. He stood in the doorway of her suite, no longer in his torn suit, but in a fresh, dark shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His eyes, though still intense, held a different quality now. A quiet satisfaction, a deep, possessive contentment. He walked to the bassinet, his large hand no longer clenched around a weapon, reaching out to gently, impossibly lightly, trace the baby's tiny head. His touch was a stark contrast to the brutal strength she knew he possessed, a symbol of his softened resolve when it came to his family. Rose watched him, a profound love swelling in her chest. Then he turned to her. He didn't speak, didn't need to. He simply held out his hand, an invitation, a silent demand. Rose didn't hesitate. She rose from her seat, her movements graceful, and placed her small hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, encompassing her completely. The power difference was immense, palpable, but it no longer terrified her. It grounded her, made her feel utterly, undeniably safe. "The nursery," he finally said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual command, almost a statement of shared anticipation. "It is ready." Rose looked into his eyes, a soft smile gracing her lips. The quiet nursery, once a secret hope, was now a living reality, a testament to his unspoken promises. She understood completely. His demands were still present, his control absolute. But now it was softened by an undeniable tenderness, a deep, abiding love that manifested as fierce protection. She yielded to him, not out of fear, but out of absolute trust and a profound love, knowing that his unwavering control was her ultimate, unshakable shield. She was his cherished wife, the mother of his heir, and in his formidable embrace she had truly found her home. Months had blurred into a rhythm Rose never could have imagined. The sun, a golden promise, streamed through the bulletproof nursery window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air and painting the room in hues of soft warmth. Rose sat in the plush rocking chair, swaying gently, her son nestled against her chest, a tiny, perfect weight. His dark hair, soft as a raven's wing, brushed her chin as he slept, his small hands curled into fists. The baby mobile, with its dancing stars and moons, swayed quietly above the crib, a silent lullaby in their sunlit sanctuary. This was her quiet life by the sea, not the one she had once dreamed of, but one far more secure, far more profound. The sparkling waters of Staten Island stretched beyond the fortified walls of the estate, a serene backdrop to a life built on absolute power and ruthless protection. She was safe, cherished, utterly protected. The world outside, the one that had once threatened to swallow her whole, was now nothing more than a distant hum, kept at bay by the formidable man who owned her heart and her child. Downstairs, Rose knew Liam Moretti would be conducting his bloody business. His name, she understood from the hushed news reports Elena sometimes left for her, was now synonymous with terror across the East Coast. He had solidified his empire, ruthlessly eliminating every threat, every challenge, ensuring that his family remained untouchable. He was a force, a legend whispered in fear, a devil to all who stood against him. Yet here, in this sunlit room, he was simply the father of her child, the silent guardian of her peace. She often thought of her past, the frantic diner shifts, the crumpled bus ticket, the desperate fear that had once consumed her. How naive she had been, believing escape was possible, believing safety lay in distance. It had been an illusion. True safety, she now knew, lay in absolute belonging, in the formidable embrace of a man who would burn the world down for her. She had chosen him, chosen the devil, and found her haven in his dangerous, unyielding love. The day faded into twilight, then into the deep hush of night. Rose had long since tucked their son into his crib, watching his peaceful slumber with a mother's fierce devotion. She was reading in her suite, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the pages when she felt it, a shift in the air, a familiar, almost imperceptible change in the estate's quiet hum. He was here. The door to the nursery opened, a soft, deliberate click that barely disturbed the silence. Rose looked up, her heart giving a quiet, contented flutter. Liam stood in the doorway, a formidable silhouette against the dim hall light. He was dressed in dark pants and a crisp black shirt, but his jacket was off, and his gun, a sleek, dark weight, was still holstered at his hip, a silent, undeniable reminder of the world he commanded, the power he wielded. He moved into the room, his steps soft, almost impossibly light for a man of his size. His gaze, usually so sharp and assessing, was solely on the crib, on the tiny form sleeping within. He reached down, his large hand, capable of such devastation, impossibly gentle as he brushed a finger over their son's soft, dark hair. Rose watched him, a profound tenderness blooming in her chest. Then he turned, his dark eyes, heavy with the weight of his day, finding hers. There was no need for words. His gaze spoke volumes, of victory, of weariness, and of an undeniable, possessive love that was reserved only for them. He walked to her, and Rose rose from her chair, meeting him halfway. He reached out, his hand, still warm from his touch on their son, cupping her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, a rough, comforting caress. The size difference between them was immense, his hand dwarfing her face, yet she felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of belonging. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment, savoring the profound safety of his presence. Then he lowered his head, his lips, firm and warm, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. It was a silent affirmation, a profound declaration of his devotion to the woman who had chosen the devil over safety and found her entire world in his dangerous, unwavering embrace. Rose felt a deep, abiding peace settle over her, a quiet certainty that nothing could ever touch them here. She was his, utterly and completely, and in his arms, she was home. If you enjoyed this story, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Tales of Power and Desire to keep up with our intense romances.